Now this is when people begin to become sedentary. They begin to stay in the same place more often. At least it's not true in the Americas, it's only true in the Old World. They begin to stay in the same place more often because there's not just one or two varieties of food that they've developed. They're developing quite a large variety of foods, and not that they're going to be able to maintain a hold on all of them. You know, eventually grain and barley become staples in the diet, and there's just very little else available in a lot of places, in a lot of cities and stuff, besides just barley and grain to eat. But early on, when they were becoming sedentary, they had domesticated, of course, cats and dogs, and were working on domesticating the ox, and they had berries and nuts and stuff that they used horticulture-wise. But this is just food gathering still. This is just horticulture. They become sedentary in the sense that they stay in the same place longer, but they still move during the winter, for example. They still can't stay in the same place permanently for year after year after year after year after year. It's just not possible by 10,000 BC. Now, complete sedentariness, I don't think it was till 1500 BC in the Americas that they started becoming sedentary, about 8,500 years after these guys in the Old World. Okay, so they found this guy in a bog, you know, a peat bog or whatever, and he had been sacrificed. They cut his throat, tied his hands and legs together, cut his throat and threw him in this bog, sacrificed him. And they were able to pull him out, and the archaeologists were able to see what his last meal had been. An extremely oxygen-deprived environment. So it was from a place in a Danish community. The residents of a Danish community slashed the throat of an unfortunate victim. Anyways, they showed that his last meal had included lots of things, nuts and berries and grains and different things. And it turns out that it decreased the variety in the human diet to go over to growing things, right? There's a large variety of things, and what would you rather? Would you rather have a constant, reliable supply of food, or would you rather have to look all over the place for just a little nibble of this and a little nibble of that and a little something of the other to try to stay alive? I mean, which one's better? So it decreased the variety in our diet, but it definitely increased the survivability of the species. Now, there are three areas that turned to agriculture in this sense. In Eastern Asia, men turned to raising millet, yams, and rice. Agriculture here may have been as early as anywhere else in the world. That's interesting, and then they didn't ever develop the phonetic alphabet, which is what blasted the West ahead, according to some interpretations. In the New World, beans, squash, potatoes, corn, and gourds were cultivated in Central America and Peru. The most important step by far was the domestication of wheat and barley by the peoples of the Near East. This development it's now the Middle East, right? This development can be tentatively placed somewhat before 7000 BC. From this region, the idea of agriculture spreads outward to most of Eurasia and Africa. Right there, 7000 BC. So somewhere between here and here, as agriculture and domestication of plants becomes more common, we get the domestication of wheat and barley. Maybe not the most important, except for the fact that they eventually developed the alphabet, except for the fact that Greek culture was born in that area. Right? What good would it have them to have wheat and barley if the Chinese sitting over there eating rice had come up with philosophy? And we can't say that wheat and barley are more survivable. Look at how many people live on rice. We might say that it's easier to farm rice, or more difficult to farm rice, easier to farm wheat and barley, but I don't know if that case could necessarily be made. Now let's look at the Americas for a little while. In the Americas, as I say, let's see, where is it? 1500 BC is when permanent occupation begins to occur. So it's clear up here. So we'll call them cities because I'm lying, it's actually villages, but around 1500 BC in America, the first villages. Clear back here you have the first villages in Eurasia. Okay? Some people say that these societies were in constant connection, and they don't know anything. They are absolutely uneducated. The pyramids that were built 2600 BC and 2800 and 2400 BC in Egypt are compared by some people to the Mayan pyramids, which were built in like the 900s AD and 1000s and 1100s and 1300s. Okay, so anyways, since it's more recent, since the American situation is so much more recent than the one in the Near East, we have been able to uncover a lot more of the story of the steps, quote, of the fascinating picture of the steps in the change to agriculture, going over from hunting and gathering into horticulture, and then slowly domesticating plants and animals and going towards agriculture. Now it suggests here that as men found game harder to locate, and as they settled into regular seasonal migrations, the humans were depleting the large animal reserves of protein around them and driving them into extinction. And so if we were going to continue to take over land and grow in numbers, we're going to have to replace these food sources that have gone extinct with new ones, namely, in this case, agriculture. So, during the period of 6700 to 5000 BC, men still migrated, but in the summer they cultivated squash, amaranth, and chili. 6700 to 5000, so right in there, they find temporary or summertime cities or villages. And these would occur along the river. They actually also grew some avocado, which requires a little bit of irrigation. And along the rivers they would gather. Lots of small wandering nomadic bands would gather by the river into temporary summer cities. And they grew things. They planted and cultivated things. Then in the winter they went out hunting again. Now, how would you like to be a hunter and gatherer in that time and see the success of agriculture? And this went on for 2,000 years, 1,700 years. This way of life went on for a long time, didn't it? And how would you like to be somebody who conglomerates in these cities, old tradition, and you just say to yourself, how wonderful it would be if we could live in cities year-round and never have to move around and never have to follow herds. It'd be so wonderful to stay in one place and to not have to worry about moving your herds and following herds and different stuff like that. And they might have projected into the future the possibility that one day cities would be permanent, or they might not have thought about it, might have taken it for granted. Okay, they estimate around 5000 BC, big black mark there, that the diet consisted 52% of wild plants, 34% of meat, and 14% of agricultural products. So agriculture for thousands of years was like a little bonus, a little surplus, a little extra. That's what agriculture was for thousands of years. For people to settle down in one place and make agriculture their only source of food was a step. That was an interesting step. Not until 3400 BC did people usually live in one place with limited movements in the winter. There's 3400 BC. So that's where it became usual and common for people to only move a little bit in the winter and mostly stay in the same place. And then, as I say, American cities, real life ones, or villages, come around 1500 BC. This is 1500 BC is the date in America where farming finally was producing enough food, not only so that they could eat during the summer with hunting and gathering, helping out a bit, but enough that they could actually store stuff up for the winter and didn't have to follow anything or go to lower grounds or anything like that. So being able to put up reserves for the winter, being productive enough, having plants that were selected for enough, that they were that efficient under human care, took a long time, didn't it? And finally, by 1500 BC, we see that in America.